Episode 195, Exercise, Growth Over Destruction.
You're listening to the very best podcast in the world on health, wealth, and happiness. Please remember to leave a review and share with all your friends and family. And here is your host, Lars Hilser.
And we are closing a totally new week on the very best podcast in the world, your only source in the universe for personal supremacy through health, wealth, and happiness. Now, when I started out planning this week, I was like, yeah, okay, what are we going to do as an exercise? Because it's not that I'm running out of ideas, but I always look for the golden nugget in the pot of ideas that I have for episodes, particularly for the exercise episodes. And there was a lot that, really concerned me about leadership in the last couple of days. Because, I had read some material by, some of these self-proclaimed motivational gurus about leadership and difference between being a boss and being a leader, and what differentiates them and what is the better version, and those kind of ordeals. And that led me to create today's episode, which is about helping people advance rather than putting them down, which largely in a very, very, very high-flying bird's eye perspective is one of the key differentiators between leaders and bosses. That being said, housekeeping, views are my own, as always. If you don't like them, well, you don't. That's okay. Perfectly fine. Sharing is caring. So when you think that this episode, it might be valuable to someone else as well, that is maybe a bit too bossy, in their job, it's worth sharing this episode with them, because then you care, and otherwise you won't. So in that sense, that's it. New piece of news. I kind of took away the explicit flag off the podcast. So, I'm going to try not to use so many bad words, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So, I'm going to slip up more frequently than not, probably. That was the housekeeping bit. So, motivating people is a skill leaders often misinterpret. Well, not leaders so much as bosses, right? Usually the boss is portrayed as someone who, will always put in front of themselves their authority, right? And so their authority is what counts, and they're, more cleverer than their subordinates. They're faster than their subordinates. And most of the times they're not. They think they are. But more often than not, they're too incompetent to tie their shoes, especially if you get to a certain level of management. You get these people who, if you were to blindfold them, and dump them out of the car 2 blocks from the office, they would be incapable of finding their way back, and they would starve on the way because they're too incompetent to, operate a coffee machine. Again, this is not for all of them, but a lot of people that I've met in these realms were of that capacity or of that failure, whatever. Leaders, on the other hand, was like, my experience was that leaders had their team put together to a degree where the team could function on its own, right? Without the leader. The leader barely, if at all, gave a rough direction, but the structure was one without a huge degree of authority. Degree, I think is the right word to use here. But it was the hierarchy was insanely flat. Everyone in the team had the same level of competency, and the leadership style was like the leader wasn't there. The team moved as an individual, cohesive object. And it was fascinating to observe. Now, why did I go with this episode in the first place? A few years back, I was sitting together with a friend, and we were talking about, and she was a teacher, and we were talking about how her students would react to a motivational session in class, in particular about entrepreneurship. And she was an educator at one of the lower levels of school. I don't know if there's an equivalent in other countries. In Germany, there's 3 levels of schooling, basically. The lowest being the idiots, the highest being the self-viewed as intellectual class, which a lot of times they're just idiots, but they're good at learning. And keeping up with the curriculum a little bit better than the others. Anyhow, long story short, she was educating these idiots, and she said, look, my students are dumb. Why should I bother giving them a training in entrepreneurship, if they're incapable of putting together anything, much less a business plan? It's a fucking waste of time. Oops, slip, sorry. So it was interesting to go into this discussion with her preconceived notion that all of the people there are dumb, right? And I felt kind of offended because during my roller coaster school career, I ended up in that level of schooling as well for a short period of time. I think it was about 2 years. Now, number one, I had shitloads of fun. The guys were really insanely funny, and always pranking the teachers, and because there was just no respect, right? This was society's way, or society's school for the dropouts, right? And it was just interesting to observe and to be there, because I didn't need to study. It was like the stuff being taught there was common sense. However, had someone been there and not necessarily given me a pep talk or anything, but had showed me the opportunities of, or the benefits of being an entrepreneur, right? It was like, I would have been like, okay, and here, this is how it's done. Now, my classmates back then had their, version of entrepreneurship, which was dealing drugs, right? So, they had to calculate margins, and all that. It was just different. It was just a different field of industry, right? But at the end of the day, they weren't really that stupid. It was just that they were living and brought up in a different world, right? And so slinging drugs to them was, like normal business. And they didn't care about accounting, right? It was about the cash coming in. Everybody knew that, they were doing their thing. If you needed weed, you went to that person. If you needed pills, if you went to that person. If you needed, speed or pep, you went to that person. Speed, pep or coke, you went to that person, and so on and so forth, right? And it was just this interesting, illustrious crowd of misfits. And a lot of them weren't really, really, really stupid, So what's the point? The point is that I did eventually change your mind, but we never got down to actually doing doing a session, because you would have had to adapt so much material, because a lot of these, folks are dreaming about being rap stars, right? A lot of these folks are, and they're good. That's the fuck up about it, right? Sorry, slipped. They're really good at what they're doing. And if they were given the chance and the knowledge on how to sell themselves and sell their music and bring it towards people, I think a lot of them could be quite successful. Now, obviously, you can't, without any legal ramifications, teach anyone how to be a drug dealer, right? But you can give them, kind of like an outlook of what they could be making, and how they could, maybe optimize their business, keep them out of jail, right? You're never going to get them out of there. It's their system. They suck at school, so they're never going to be, exposed to any higher levels of education. So, this cycle of frustration starts for them, and they do what they're good at, which is, criminalized things, right? Because, you don't really need to stick to the rules. You're pretty cool, and you don't need an accountant or, tax advisor or anything like that. On the other hand, you're not paying anything into the pension funds, right? Therefore, you are never eligible for pension. But that's not what these people look out for. And that's where I think, she thought that they were stupid because they didn't understand the system. Well, they live outside of it, and they were failed by the system. So that's why they lived in this underworld. Well, quote unquote underworld, but you know what I mean, right? So how do you motivate someone correctly? And I think that's one of the most interesting questions which you and I and no one can really answer. But if we are motivated, and if we see someone that can benefit from our motivation, I think that's where, this one of these peak developments of humanity comes in, where we have to say, okay, look, I'm gonna pick this person up, and I'm gonna take them under my wing, and we're gonna fly high, right? And that's what today's exercise is about, right? What you could be doing. I'm not saying you should, but you could. Look for someone in your sphere of influence that's, maybe not really coping well with the entire Rona thing, right? Or their business isn't doing so well because of the Rona thing, or anything because of the Rona thing, but, there are difficulties otherwise as well. And the thing is to sit down with them and to motivate them to look at their situation from a different perspective, or to motivate them to say, okay, look, your business isn't Rona proof. It's not future proof. Therefore, let's try and analyze, and let's try and look at different ways where you could excel. Or is there a person maybe that's thinking and contemplating about choosing a career path where you would say, wait, hold on, you will be way better off here? Because a lot of times it's not about that the people want to choose the wrong path. It's just that they don't know better because they lack outside reflection. And I am going to put a very, very, very big fucking exclamation mark behind reflection, because it's not like that they don't want to. They don't get feedback. A lot of people don't. And if they get feedback, it's not feedback, it's flack, right? Because they screw up, because they're screw ups, they're misfits, right? Like the people I mentioned to you earlier. So essentially, it's this episode is about taking someone and being a mentor to them and helping them, with your excess motivation, which you may have, and sharing it with them, to help them excel as well. And I think that's really one of the best exercise episodes we've actually ever made, because it's about helping others rather than developing yourself, and assuming that you've used the previous 194 episodes to motivate yourself to a degree where you can now share your motivation with others. So in that sense, I hope you have a nice weekend. I hope you find someone that you can become a mentor to, and that the relationship between the two of you, motivates you as it motivates them equally. And keep me posted. Write me an email. Also, if you have any questions, to the very best podcast in the world at gmail.com. And I'll be happy to answer. And right now we're going to wrap this up. And have a nice weekend. We'll be in touch on Monday. Bye, folks.